The "I'm high right now" line is explicitly stolen from Kevin Durant and his interview with David Letterman. And David Letterman, is like, "Oh, so I hear you're into cannabis." And Kevin Durant, I'm a huge NBA fan, season tickets to the Raptors and obsessive. Kevin Durant answers like, "I'm high right now," and just the perfect kind of AB, because we were working on that brief right as that interview came out, and the rest is history.
Culture, cannabis, and creativity. Marketing in the cannabis space ain't for the faint-hearted. Having the best ideas, boundless energy, and fanatical enthusiasm aren't enough, even in fully rec markets like Canada. Paul K Lawton, award-winning strategist, former academic, and co-founder of cannabis ad agency sister Merci, joins us for a cultured chinwag about the current state of play. Hello and welcome to the Lobsterpot podcast. I'm Dave Barton, and yes, I'm still here. We're still here, aren't we, Jamie? How are you doing?
Man, I'm good. I'm noticing the background, like we've got a real mix today, and it'll pop up on screen in a moment. Our lovely guest, but I have like a drill and some plants behind me, and there's absolutely no connection between them. And you've kind of
I've just got like that thing we did a sticker of, which all stickers available here. Then you can see that. Oh, there you go. Oh, nice green screening. There we go. There's our new stickers. I like stickers. I should put them. I had like one of those little Mad Hatter things, that says like 10.5. See, I've never understood what that whole measurement thing is. I think, I thought it was like dick size. Anyway, we won't get into that because today we've got a really important guest. We've got an award-winning creative from the lovely sister Merci agency based in Ontario, Canada. We have one of the co-founders, key strategist, former academic, and all-round don. It is the lovely Paul K Lawton. How are you doing today, sir?
Good. Thanks for having me, guys.
Not a problem at all. I was going to say, you're Paul K, also known as PK. I'm David K. What does your K stand for? I'll divulge my K once you divulge yours. What are we ready to do that? Do we feel comfortable?
Sure. It's Kenneth.
Kenneth. Okay.
Yeah. How about you?
Keith.
Okay, yeah.
Which is my dad's. I mean, my parents just went completely unoriginal. It's like, oh, what should we give our son a middle name? Oh, same name as his father. Same. My sister has my. Anyway, is your father a Kenneth?
My grandfather.
Grandfather. Okay. See, at least that's there's a kind of like honor thing there. Like, we're going to honor the grandfather rather than just kind of go, yeah, I can't think of a name. We'll just give you my name.
Yeah, it's the Ken Smallwood, who is a great man. His first cousin was Joey Smallwood, who brought Newfoundland into Canadian Federation as their premier back in 1900.
You know what? I would love to have that. I would love to find out more about that, because I find the whole tale of Newfoundland as a province as recently as 1949, I think, was part of Britain. So.
Yeah, and then it was good old Joey, that brought it into Canadian Confederation.
Well, I love it. But set a high precedent, I guess, for yourself. Being a pioneer of sorts in the Canadian. Do you like my nice little segue there? It's all about the segues.
Yeah, I'm sure my ancestors are super stoked that we went from bringing confederating a province to leading a weed branding agency.
But hey, it's working for you, right? So tell us a little bit more about, obviously, I'm high right now for the Cannabis Media Council. That's done wonders. How many awards has it won? I'm just going to put you on the spot now.
Well, we won 7 Clio awards, which was pretty good. We won just Campaign of the Year for a Canadian industry awards called AdCan. So won the American Campaign of the Year. So yeah, it's done very well, I think. I think the stuff for us that we're more excited on that campaign is like, I know this is like super niche and nerdy, but because it was Cannabis Media Council was in part founded by Hearst Publications, so Fair and whatnot. So our I'm High Right Now was the first cannabis ad ever run in Vanity Fair and Vogue and it was the first cannabis client we ever put on Pornhub. So it was like, media placements, which you would think are not as, most categories that's like, oh, well, you put a print ad, congratulations, you're an advertising agency. In cannabis, that's easier said than done in a mainstream publication. So I think it's
absolutely
a way to normalization and all those things.
No, absolutely. No, and congrats. I mean, again, for those who haven't seen it, definitely check it out. So, but yeah, tell us a little bit more. I mean, again, you have all these books. You were an academic, not just Stephen King fanatic, although, much respect for that. But tell us, how did you kind of get into this whole cannabis weed creativity thing from tell us more about how you kind of got into this.
So, you hate to start any bio with like your parents, but I ended up in the prairies in Alberta, a little city called Lethbridge, and for someone who's like an academically minded, like myself, I grew up a voracious reader from a very young age, and I ended up just going to university because of the lack of anything else to do, and I ended up falling into sociology. I went through a master's and PhD, which I have not completed, so I'm not formally a doctor, but I have ABD, so I've done everything up to defending my dissertation. 10 years ago, I was doing I was a prof, an adjunct prof. I was teaching digital culture and sociology of health, and surprisingly to me, these things kind of coalesce in cannabis as I think part of the normalization of cannabis and some of the drive towards legalization has come from, the med side of the coin. And what you have in the 90s into the early 2000s is patient groups connecting and sharing alternative therapies and things. And, cannabis happens to be part of that. So when I was studying in my PhD, the way that patients were using digital technology to kind of augment their healthcare and, not as dependent on their primary doctor and health team, started to kind of what we saw as like the rise of the expert patient. And I think that starts to open up different kinds of treatment and different kind of therapies and different kind of approaches to health. And so one of those being cannabis. And at that same time, because I was teaching in digital culture, and I was teaching a lot of classes in communications, communications theory, mass communications. I was 2012 looking at the academic life and thinking it was not for me. It was very slow, and I was also at the same time a musician, touring, and just living a very weird life. Ended up moving to Toronto and talking my way into advertising, and a couple years into that, we ended up starting Sister Merci. But we're 5 years in March 1st.
Awesome.
Yeah,
that's it. And just after the kind of I guess rec started in Canada, isn't it? Really. So you were kind of a few months in. It's like,
right away. Yeah, I was at a big agency in Canada called Cossette. And I was the brand strategist that did a lot of the early brand work on the agency side with Canopy Growth. So my first project was thrown into with the beverage team, for example, as they were kind of figuring out what are our beverage brands that we're going to do. And it was the very fabled relationship between Canopy and Constellation. So we were working with the Constellation team to come up with what kind of cannabis beverages. We were like imagining from everything from, what are our cannabis beers and what are our cannabis sodas? And I spent an entire summer in focus groups talking to people about the different ways that they consume and ingest cannabis. And I started falling in love with this category just because of, I was used to working for airlines and fast food and the big stuff that people at advertising agencies work on, and I was working on Walmart, things like this. And all of a sudden,
bit of a change, quite a change.
This category that is inventing, and it's new. And it's like, as someone who is interested in brands, being a Canadian, we're a hinterland to the main markets. So Canadian strategists don't get a lot of opportunity to create brands or to develop brand architecture and all this other stuff. And so that that love at Cossette with Canopy kind of led to us kind of starting our own thing. So very, it's been great. I mean, up and down in the industry, but
again, I feel like you guys, I mean, specifically Canada as a nation, you're kind of almost sort of leading the charge in a way in terms of, you know, well, it's an interesting one because again, everyone goes, oh, like how's Canada how's that legalization process works? What's happening? How are things shaken out? And again, from a marketing perspective as well, again, sort of pioneer. I mean, again, there's some from what we've seen when we were over in Toronto, seeing some of the great brands that you have. I mean, just going to a dispensary and sort of seeing things on show is just amazing. And again, it teaches us we can have nice things without the world falling apart. So I think again, that's something again. Just, you know, experiencing that firsthand and thinking, wow, there is so much you can do with this sort of category. And again, it's always, again, were you talking about the sort of medical side of thing and how sort of patient groups came together? I mean, I sort of mentioned this, I think, in our pre-chat, the idea that, you know, you have this something that makes people feel, you know, so much better, you know, pain relief, you know, reducing seizures, everything like that, to this is a great thing to have on a Friday night. It's almost like, how do you almost think about a brand in that way? I guess you don't, is the thing, because you're thinking of the particular type of thing. Or do you? I'm kind of intrigued because again, it's always a quandary for me. And again, in the UK, you have these kind of, we have our own troubles around the sort of legalization. We have medical, but again, we're struggling to get patient numbers up for various reasons. So it's almost like wrapping your head around the entirety of, you know, what cannabis is and can do, and how do you almost like bring that to the forefront from a kind of branding perspective? It's just an interesting challenge.
I think from day one, I was lucky enough to work with a brilliant strategist at Cossette, Wes Wolch, who is now head of brand marketing for Holt Renfrew, which is a big Canadian clothing company, and you know. Is that America in the UK too? I don't know if that's a Canadian brand or not, but anyways, I
don't buy clothes. I just find them. Yeah.
Wes used to say to me all the time, you know, as we were kind of like early days thinking about cannabis brands, and he used to use the line that, you know, cannabis is just an ingredient, and it's an ingredient that, you know, in kind of the body and like the wellness idea. So to me, like the kind of rise of, or the legalization push of cannabis coalesces along with that rise of like the wellness culture and health and wellness in this whole world. And I think that that's an easy bridge from the medical side to it, where it's like, yeah, this cannabis has very real measurable health impacts for people with certain conditions. And so from a medicalization standpoint, it makes sense. But, you know, if you look at a lot of the reasons why people go to buy cannabis, it's a lot of stress reduction, sleep. And if I'm taking it on a Friday night because I've had a shit week, well, you know, that's rec, but it's also self-care. You know what I mean? So these bridges are everywhere with cannabis because it has such a unique way to kind of like fit into so many places, like an ingredient to culture too. That's another important part of it. And, you know, you also have the license socially from years of, you know, music and movie culture where cannabis has been kind of normalized as something like how we all grew up with songs about weed and being high. And I mean, it's, you know, here we are, right?
Well, it's the whole thing, isn't it? I mean, again, I always feel, I mean, this is my own perception, that kind of cannabis has more of a kind of presence culturally in North America. Well, and, you know, more so than perhaps Europe or the UK. I mean, you know, we have our own sort of cannabis culture, but it's a lot more, I don't know, it feels like there's more, dare I say, menace to it from the perception of, you know, it's a criminal thing, where it's kind of like, it's just a, you know, more of a sort of, you know, a stoner thing. It's just people kind of like hanging out and sort of, you know, but again, those perceptions, you know, those, you know, they come from, there's an element of truth to them, but at the same time, it's almost like I mean, again, this is particular sort of bugbear of mine, the way in which you see cannabis kind of presented in different media and things like that. And again, I remember reading something at Christmas, you know, it was like an overview of like some shitty TV show in like the newspaper or something, and sort of like, and her life went on a downward spiral when she started using cannabis. And it's just, you know, it's just things like that. You just start to see it just gets thrown in to a kind of negative standpoint. And again, or it becomes that lazy stoners kind of thing, or it's just kind of like people who, you know, just kind of disregard everything else. And again, I guess that's what you were challenging with really I'm High right now, where you've got kind of older people sort of show, you know, again, playing to that stoner stereotype, but showing kind of people, you know, respectable older people in that kind of scenario. And again, that narrative is always feel like, for me, even before I saw that, I think we talked about this, Jamie, if we can kind of get the sort of grandmother sort of demographic on side, it's kind of like if you show someone older who's meant to be respectable, like an authority figure, kind of like, you know, but in approachable, it's kind of like, well, if they can use it, then it can't be that bad, can it? Surely. And I guess, you know, it's all of that sort of wrapped in a nutshell, isn't it? And then thinking when you start, I mean, in terms of how people have kind of responded to that campaign, do you feel like really you sort of made an impact? Have you heard kind of even anecdotally?
I think saying, so. It starts kind of early. It starts early for us because a lot of the entrepreneurs that we're first working with in cannabis are like older and wealthy individuals who are looking to, you know, in their, you know, twilight era, do something a little more interesting and more fun.
Mm-hmm.
And the number of conversations that I've had since day one of working in weed, which is, you know, well, you know, I got my grandma on CBD and, you know, all of these things, like, you know, I'm at the very tail end of the Gen X group, and I definitely remember growing up with stigma around, you know, in North America. I don't know if you guys ever saw the "This Is Your Brain on Drug" public awareness campaigns. You know, it's a frying pan and it's an egg, and it's like, "This is your brain. This is your brain on drugs. Any questions?" And then it's like what you see in the data, and that I'm High right now is definitely a data-driven campaign in the sense that you look at 9 in 10 Americans generally being positive of legalization or having no barrier to legalization, but that group who definitely came of age as adults in the heavy prohibition era of the, you know, the Reagan 80s and the war on drugs and all of that other thing. It's like the boomers are generally supportive of weed, but they're the last ones buying it recreationally, going into the dispensaries and stuff. And, you know, you'll still hear anecdotally the boomers are like, "Oh, I got my CBD gummy." You know, it's like a little bit of a dirty secret. And so for us, really, it came down to, you know, the brief from CMC, which is, you know, we want to help normalize cannabis. So how can we start doing that? And it's like, well, let's focus on one huge audience that drives political will in the US, which is that boomer voting block. And let's actually micro target that generation, because I don't need to do advertising to normalize cannabis to people my age and younger. You know, you just don't. It's definitely something that is already kind of built in, but that you see the boomers as the big last kind of mountain to climb, and so that was the intent of that behavior. And then the "I'm High right now" line is explicitly stolen from Kevin Durant and his interview with David Letterman. And David Letterman, you know, is like, "Oh, so I hear you're into cannabis." And Kevin Durant, I'm a huge NBA fan, season tickets to the Raptors and obsessive. You know, Kevin Durant answers like, "I'm high right now," and just the perfect kind of A/B, because we were working on that brief right as that interview came out, and, you know, the rest is history.
That's a cracking bit of how the sausage is made, I suppose. You know, the backside. It's really interesting. I think the kind of experience that you have, Paul, is particularly interesting because you work with sort of big brands on the agency side.
Yeah.
This is, I guess, a two-parter. What is the best part about working with cannabis brands? And perhaps it is maybe the wider kind of cause and industry that makes it engaging for you. And what are some of the challenges, or what is the hardest part, do you think, about working with cannabis brands, or that you've experienced? Because you've been doing it successfully for 5 years. and you've done it agency side with big clients before. So yeah, what is that kind of, what's the kind of difference there?
Yeah, I think the good side is kind of what I said earlier. It's what gets me going every day. Like, we've been running this agency for 5 years, and I've, aside of a few little breaks, I've just been writing for 5 years, right? Because I'm really still, even 5 years in, I'm super excited about the innovation and the kind of the novelty of being able to be at the ground floor of a budding industry, being able to travel and meet people from different kind of entrepreneurial minded people. I was just in Detroit with my partner Katie and our head of client service Jill. We sponsored a cannabis event in Detroit, just like a little meet and greet, smoke sesh, and we went down there, and you're just like, it's this bond of people who are all attracted for very similar reasons of opportunity and growth and creation and creativity, and so that's what gets us out of bed. The downside is, man, there was a lot of money early days, so there's a lot of mistakes that were made just because there was a lot of money. There wasn't a lot of like, you're starting to see a lot more now of cannabis brands that are like bootstrapped. You see it in Michigan, especially. Michigan was a little bit late to the legalization party. By the time they get up and going, a lot of the capital has dried up in that era. So it's a lot of mom and pop growers, and there's big brands there too, like Steezy's and a lot of the California brands, and like the Michigan's own Jeter brand, who we're helping to bring into Canada excitedly right now. There's like cool stuff happening, but it's back to the kind of community cannabis thing. So we get a little bit of both worlds, where you do get these big companies that are trying to figure this stuff at scale, and then you also have these kind of young budding entrepreneurs who are trying to create new, and that is just infectious, and we meet that energy every time. The hard part, yeah, like it's like these brands just like came out of the gate and we're like, we're gonna have 9 brands under our belt, and you're like, wait, what? Like, one brand is all you need, right? Like, why 9? It was like, well, we got to have a brand for health and wellness, we got to have a brand for the stoners, we got to have a value brand, we got to have a premium brand. And it's just like, the amount of money and complexity that you get after you move from one brand to 2 is a lot. It's a big jump. And especially because most of the cannabis brands now, especially the ones that are struggling, the first people to go are the marketing team. So, we get to work with, the CFO to create a brand campaign, or we get to create, it's all, again, entrepreneurs and people trying their best and stuff. But the early days, I think our experience was working with like brand managers from P&G and big Bev alcohol and stuff. And they knew how to work with agencies. We knew how to work with them. And over the last few years, we've definitely shifted down towards like, where are you at with your understanding of what marketing is? Do we understand marketing and sales as 2 different arms of that need to happen? Do you need to market cannabis? Yes. Is it possible to build a cannabis brand? Yes. Those are the challenges because, a lot of people, you didn't have cannabis brands 15 years ago, and a lot of cannabis was sold. So why do we need brands now? Right. Or the cannabis marketing restrictions are tough. So then we should just not do any marketing at all. These are the kinds of conversations that we have daily. And then because the margins are so slim, because there's so many entrepreneurs at once trying to make it at the same time, the budgets have gone from this to big to little. So it's like we have to do a lot more with a lot less, and that's challenging. It's just like the shared language of marketers is challenging when you have to talk to people who, I had one client who was like confused between a community manager answering a DM on Twitter and a Twitter advertising buy. Well, we're already doing that. Well, no, you're commenting on someone's tweet about your brand. That's 1-to-1, and we can advertise your brand and can it on Twitter to everybody. That's a difference, and it's those kinds of you kind of have to bring people along, which is it's.
No, I feel like that. I feel that absolutely. I mean, even in a market like Canada has been, sorry, I was going to say, going for 5 years, you still feel like people or cannabis entrepreneurs are not getting what you need to do from a marketing perspective. They're just like, they need that reassurance. They need people like yourself and us to some extent, to bring them on,
It's like, I have $10 to spend. And should I spend that $10 on long-term brand building that might pay off in 5 years? Or am I spending that $5 on a brand ambassador team to go do a pop-up at a dispensary and get that short-term win? So it's really that lack of, the Bennett, less Bennett, like long and short of it, long-term brand building and short-term activation. The Canadian market, because it's been chasing quarterly revenue, has just pretty much gravitated towards sales marketing as a practice. And then the brands that we work with that invested beyond into brand and stuff like that, well, those are the brands that are in the top of the sales charts every month because we've been working with those brands sometimes for years, and it's starting to really pay off. One of our brands we found out the other day has the highest market penetration in Ontario. That's not because they did only sales activations. It's because they invested in their brand writ large at every available touch point. And it's not that hard to really to make that leap, So they do both, but you can't do one without the other.
I think we're gonna reposition this podcast. I think we're only gonna get marketers on, and it's gonna be therapy for whoever gets to listen. Because that's why I'm just gonna sit and preach. It's
yeah.
No, 100%.
Whenever I write a LinkedIn post, that's kind of like in this kind of like exacerbated tone of like, this isn't. I know we're struggling with this concept, but it's not a hard concept to grasp if we look at the data. And those tend to do well for Jamie, those exact reasons. It's like a lot of other marketers going, yes, why does this giant company not have a CMO?
Yeah, I feel seen finally.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, it is crazy times. And I mean, we spoke before about, what's happening here in the UK. And again, just to kind of pick your brains, what do you think to some extent? I mean, I think what you were saying before about, kind of empowering kind of, expert patients. I mean, I feel like that could be a really good thing here. I mean, there's a number of clinics, probably sort of 20 or 30 here, I think, here in the UK. And again, I guess the path to kind of conversion in the kind of marketing sense is still very, there's a lot of obstacles. You kind of have to, medical records, you have to be able to prove you've spent 2 different types of treatments, blah, 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 blah. Yep. But even in the kind of, even with all of that kind of aside, there's still very much the stigma. There's still very much, I'm not sure cannabis is for me. Because again, you see the kind of more extreme cases and the kind of the life transformation stuff rather than, this makes me feel better. Actually, I'm less anxious. It takes the edge off. And it's almost like reconciling that with just kind of, I won't say normal, but you know what I mean, in terms of like, this is the day-to-day life. It's not kind of anyone who has anything kind of life-threatening. It's still very much like, it affects the quality of life, but, this could actually be beneficial. And it's almost kind of getting that message out.
I think that it's what every other market that's legalized recreationally cannabis has taught us is that it goes med first. Because med is where you build the social license to the point of that, we made this comment a few times on this episode of, sky's not going to fall as soon as more people are smoking cannabis. There was that guy on Twitter this weekend that got, he became the main character on Twitter this weekend because he posted a can of CBD based drink called Recess. It was like, this is the downfall of society. And people are like, bro has one, CBD beverage.
I missed that completely for that.
Because it's actually not true, right? And I think that before you get to the marketing and the brand side, there has to be PR battles that have to be won. And I will say that if we look at the Canadian legalization story, the lead up to legalization was a PR battle first and foremost, like in the truest sense of winning over the public in this idea that A, there's therapeutic benefits to this, B, anywhere there's legalization, the big fear is we got to protect our youth. And there's good data now from every state that's in the US and Canada that youth consumption does not increase. In fact, in many cases, it decreases because you shift the oversight of cannabis from police trying to catch bad guys and, you know, collecting weed and getting it off the streets with like a couple edibles or whatever, to, okay, well, you have to be 19 plus and you have to show ID, and this is the easiest way to get it. And yeah, you can still get cannabis if you really know how to. I was a fiend for it in high school. We had our ways, you know, but it's that PR battle that starts with, you know, Charlotte's Web and the story of CBD and seizures in children and these kinds of things, where you can definitely point a line between the awareness of cannabis actually having real medical benefits to allowing better access to it medically, to okay, a lot of these people are actually coming here for stress and other things that the legal or the healthcare industry doesn't necessarily have the resources to deal with. So let's just make it easier for everybody, and let's just legalize it, and then let's legalize it and then slowly release some of the restrictions. So the legalization in Canada, I would just call it like a lighter form of prohibition in many ways. But that's, again, I think, a very purposeful path from medicalization to recreation, and not needing to like freak out the squares first, and to have this kind of slowly integrate without it being, you know, negative societally, I guess, or whatnot. So I think that social license thing is a huge one, and just getting the stories of patients and people out to the front lines of your media, your press, just to make it be like, yeah, like there's no one has ever died from a cannabis overdose. You know, like we don't have people smoking weed and then getting put in the drunk tank because they're starting fights in the pub or whatnot. You know what I mean?
Yes, absolutely.
Things don't happen, right? So
but the thing is, it takes time, and that's the thing. And I think that's where I think a lot of the frustration comes, particularly for those of us working in the industry. It takes a goddamn lot. But then I think to do it properly, it has to, doesn't it? And it
does have to, yeah. And it is. I often get impatient because I'm like, really, like, but I'm noticed like where we are now, 5 years into legalization, is actually a lot better than where we were 5 years ago, and it actually just took time. A lot of the things that I was saying 5 years ago of like a brand effect takes 5 years, right, for it to fully start to pay dividends. And we're seeing some of the brands that have done the hard work for 5 years again win this long game, because it wasn't an overnight flash in the pan, let's get it all at once.
No, absolutely. And I believe it. And I think, you know, as we always sort of say, don't we, Jamie, it's probably another 8 to 10 years before we get anything like recreational here. But again, it's kind of, you know, we have to keep building that momentum, keep telling those stories, you know, all of the stories, you know, all of the reinforcement, you know, it's, you know.
Well, even like pushing towards deregulation instead of legalization first. Because then what you see once you get deregulation is you get gray market. And then gray markets everywhere. And then it's like, oh, well, cat's out of the bag, right? So.
Well, exactly. I mean, well, again, that happened in Thailand, but then they've gone, oh, hang on, we need to actually regulate it now.
That's
Even though it's been legalized. Oh, shit, hang on, a year later, let's figure this out.
That's partly what happened in Canada, too, actually, is they deregulated, and then overnight, the gray market scene was, there's pop-ups everywhere, and it became whack-a-mole for the police, and the police ended up being like, we're not going to spend our resources trying to take down all these like fly-by-night deregulated dispensaries who are pretending to be med dispensaries, but you know, there's an iPad, that person's claiming to be a nurse. I guess. Sure.
But that's it. But no, it's like you say, it is a long game, and it's as frustrating as it is, that's kind of the way it is. And I think, you know, it's hard, it's easy to say, yeah, we know it's a long game, but when you're in it, it's like, fuck's sake, it really is, isn't it? But there we go. It's you know, it's encouraging, I suppose, to hear that, because there is no magic cure. Like cannabis, it's not, unlike cannabis, it's not a magic cure for everything like everybody says it is.
Well, and then you get the next wave of problems, which is, okay, well, recreation comes, so then a bunch of investment money comes in, and then all these companies scale to all these extreme heights. And you do see that next wave after legalization. There's other problems ahead of you guys to come. Yep. So don't be anxious for the next one right away necessarily, because although the fun era of spend is really great for agencies,
is it sustainable? Yeah, that's the thing.
Keeping it, and I think that's where you guys have the most opportunity, is to say, let's learn from the mistakes that happen in the cycles of all these states and countries that have legalized before us, and maybe make some measured progress by not duplicating. Because what we see now is, like, state by state, as Sister Merci does more, moves from Canada into more of the US work, is that you can go into a state and talk to some of the entrepreneurs and, like, we've made this mistake already. Let's show you the losses of the company that made that mistake, and let's tighten it up, and here's maybe a different way to approach it. And so, if we're not learning from the history of this, then it's just doomed to that up and down boom bust cycle in this category, and it just makes it hard for everybody. So
no, absolutely, very true, very wise words, sir. But no, it's been great to chat with you, Paul. Thank you so much for coming on the show, and yeah,
of course,
good luck with it all. And catch you soon for sure.
Okay, appreciate it, guys.
Alrighty, catch you later. All the best.